Three, two, one.
Today is March 19th, 2024. We are interviewing Frank Schatz. My name is Esther Finder. Mr. Schatz is in Williamsburg, Virginia. I am in Henderson, Nevada in the United States, and the language will be English.
And cut.
Thank you for speaking with us today. What is your name, sir, and can you please spell it?
Frank Schatz, Schatz.
What was your name at birth?
I have a Hungarian, a Czech name, so in Czech it was František, my first name. In Hungarian it was Ferenc, and now I am Frank. And the friends called me Ferry, with Dame. I have multiple names, but I sign my check only by my name.
Could you spell the other two versions of your name?
First name, Ferry, it is F-E-R-I. It is, and I spell it also sometimes F-E-R-Y. But you want me to spell also the Hungarian name, the Ferenc?
Yes.
The Ferenc is F-E-R-E-N-C-Y. And in Czech, it is František, and it is F-R-N-I-T-S-E-K. So complicated.
Thank you for spelling. Where were you born?
I was born at that time, my hometown was named Parkan. Actually, it was named like Parkan since the Austrian-Hungarian Empire existed. It was a small town on the banks of the Danube River, on the frontier between Czechoslovakia and Hungary. Now it is Slovakia. During the war, it reverted again to Hungary. It multiple times it changed hands.
Could you spell the name of the town when you were born?
It
What was
is
the name then?
P-E-A-R-K-A-N, Parkan. And I was born in 1926, so at that time, Parkan was still named Parkan, but belonged to the Czechoslovak Republic. Now the name is Šturovo, and it is Slovakia. So I suppose American listener will be a little bit confused, but it was normal for Eastern European places to change hands constantly.
And how old are you today, sir?
I was just February 26, 98 years old, but I don't know how old I am because I am still walking 3 miles every day. I live on the second floor in a condo and climb 200 steps every way. And I am still turning out my weekly columns on world affairs for the Virginia Gazette, the oldest paper in America. Once when I started, I said to my editor, now isn't it funny that I am writing for the oldest paper in America with my accent? And he didn't have a great sense of humor, and he said, but when people read what you write, they don't hear you, so it's okay.
What was your father's name?
Edmund Schatz. But at that time, our name was spelled S-C-H-A-T-Z. ATZ. It's a German name and it means treasure. So one of my ancestors must have paid a lot of money to Kaiser Joseph II because he was always short of money and he was selling names, and who paid a lot of money got a very prestigious name, and who didn't have the money get a unpleasant name. So Schatz in German means treasure.
Where was your father born?
Also in Parkan. My family lived in this town for generations. They were grain merchants and manufactured brandy. They were well-to-do people, and the family business went from father to son. Most probably I would have inherited it too, but first the Nazis and then the communists took it all away. So it is why I am today in Williamsburg, Virginia, and I'm a journalist.
What was your mother's name?
Charlotte. Again, should I spell it? Charlotte, like Charlottesville. And her maiden name was Abrányi. It's a Hungarian name. Most probably also her family, they were all educators. Her father was a superintendent of school in Košice, what was at that time also part of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. And so Abrányi, they must have changed it because at that time Jews in this kind of position, they didn't advertise it that they are Jews.
What work did she do?
My mother was a teacher, and she was before she got married, she was a teacher in one of the most prestigious elite Budapest schools. Most of her students were the sons and daughters of Hungarian aristocrats and very rich people. She must have been an excellent teacher because getting this position as a Jewish girl, she must have been very good at it.
Was
How
that?
many
I'm sorry, Esther. I heard a notification. Is your phone on notification?
On,
No. Oh,
No.
not mine.
Mr. Schatz. Sorry, Esther.
no. So,
Let me turn off here. Let me turn it all the way down. Okay. Sorry. We're good.
Are we rolling?
Yes, ma'am.
How many siblings do you have?
I had two siblings. Those were the step sister and step brother. My father was married before he married my mother, and his first wife died. Supposedly was a very beautiful woman, and died very young. So my sister was about 6 years older than me. Her name was Elizabeth, and my brother name was Wojtek, again in Czech, but she as in Hungarian was Béla. He was about 3 years older than me. And my sister died in Auschwitz with her baby. They were both gassed on arrival, selected by Dr. Mandela, what's his name? You know, the Mandela. And my brother survived the war but came home 40 pounds. He was an athlete, he was a big man, and but he survived and immigrated to Israel after the war and died in Israel. So I have no relatives anymore.
What religious traditions did your family observe when you were little?
What do you mean? This? What did I do?
What religious traditions?
We were very proud Jews. My father was supporting Zionism, but we weren't really practicing Jews. So my background is more of a cultural Jew than a religious Jew.
Did you have a favorite holiday when you were a child?
Yes, some the great holidays, and we always invited. I was a military garrison in town, and my mother always invited a few soldiers to have. It was mostly for Seder, but it was more as a formal thing than a religious exercise.
What do you know about the relationships between the Jews and the non-Jews in your hometown when you were little?
It's an interesting question, and I have an interesting answer. There were about maybe 50 Jewish families in our town. About the town, like it was a border town, so it was quite cosmopolitan, but mostly who lived there were Hungarian and peasant and agricultural worker. The Jews who lived there, the 50 families, were all doctors, lawyers, and business people. And because my family lived for generation in this town and went to school there, my father had a lot of friends, very close friends, who weren't Jewish. And so our family relation, and I have also friends who weren't Jewish. So our relation, my family's relations were very close with the whole community, not just Jews. But I remember when we were living under the democratic Czechoslovak Republic. So there was no anti-Semitism like in Hungary, that people got along until 1938, when my hometown was incorporated into Hungary, fascist Hungary, and it is when everything changed.
We'll get to that in just a moment. What are some of your earliest childhood memories?
I grew up in a very prosperous family, and I had, as far as I can remember, I had no problem, except I remember vaguely that it was a time when it was it must have been in the 30s, when the United States was a great depression. And so my father had all kinds of businesses, and it affected his business. And so I remember there were problems, financial problems, but in the end it was solved. And my childhood had good memories. I don't remember any drastic things.
Did you witness or experience any anti-Semitism in your childhood?
It is what I was mentioning, that must have been, because Hungarians regardless of it was in Hungary or in the territories, what they grew up with anti-Semitism in their blood. So but because of my father's close relationship with the whole community, I never experienced again until 1938, after the Munich Agreement between Hitler and Chamberlain. And at that time, everything changed.
When you were a young schoolboy, what did you want to be? You said you probably would have inherited the family business. Is that what you wanted, or did you dream
No,
of something
actually,
else?
first I wanted to be a doctor because my cousin from Hungary, who couldn't get into the university in Hungary, he was studying in Prague, and my family was supporting him. So I remember whenever he went on vacation, he stopped at our house and we talked about his dream of becoming a doctor. And so I wanted to be a doctor, but it passed. And in the end, I wound up as a journalist.
Were there any restrictions on your dreams because you were Jewish?
Now, again, not in my case. Even when the Hungarian took over, and it was a specific thing with my family. My father was a so-called war hero from the First World War, but also he had other connections with Hungary. So in 1938, when the territories, the southern Slovakia, was incorporated into Hungary, all the Hungarian anti-Jewish laws that were already in existence, they applied to all the Jews in those territories. But because of my father's service, so-called service to the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, so my family was excluded from those anti-Jewish laws. So my father could retain his brandy-making business. You needed a government license for it, and no Jew could have that. And to schools, although I wasn't ready for university, but I went to a Catholic gymnasium in Esztergom. It was a town just on the other side of the Danube River. And so I didn't have, again, until the 1940s, I didn't have any restriction on me. But all my friends, Jewish friends, they were all restricted in many, many ways. So I was very much aware of it, what is going on.
How much did you know in the 1930s, before the borders changed for you? How much did you know about Hitler and what he was doing in Germany?
Now, again, my father had also a moving company. And so, because we were a border town, people coming to immigrating from Germany or anywhere, they always stopped at our house. And even before the really restrictive anti-Jewish laws went into effect in Germany, if Jews gave up their properties, the Germans let them go to Palestine, at that time was not Israel, Palestine. And many times they stopped because they went from Germany to Czechoslovakia and Hungary and Romania, where they take ships to Palestine. Many of them had certificates that they were legitimately going, but many didn't have, and they had to be smuggled into Palestine. So they stopped at our house, and my parents feed them and gave them shelter, and so I always was participating in the dinner table. Everything was discussed. We were a very political family, and so with the food, I got also all the lessons about international and politics. So I was very much aware of it, what is going on in Germany. Interestingly, my father, who was a very astute businessman and political thinker, didn't take Hitler's threat against Jews so seriously. He always thought that bankers like the Rothschild will be able to defend the Jews. It was a very naive concept, but for a long time he believed that Hitler wouldn't be able to accomplish what he wanted because the powerful Jewish financiers will prevent it. Of course, it was so. Answering your question, I was very much aware of it, what is going on, but because Czechoslovakia was a quite powerful military force, it has a big armament industry, and Czechoslovakia was allied with France and England, and so we thought we are safe. So nobody expected the Munich agreement, what happened. So all my really bad memories go back to 1938 when the Munich agreement was signed.
Before we start 1938, is there anything that you didn't mention about your previous, your childhood, that you'd like to mention before we move on to 38?
Like I said before, my memories of it were not bad. I had a good childhood. We had an interesting family. If it would have stayed like that, I wouldn't be interviewed today by you because I wouldn't have anything to say, nothing interesting. But all those things started in 1938.
So walk us through the changes in 1938, step by step, as best as you could recall.
Now, again, the 1938, Hitler and Chamberlain signed this Munich agreement, and part of it was, of course, Czechoslovakia, the Democratic Republic, was dismembered, and part of Slovakia was transferred, including the town where we live, to Hungary. And Hungary was already an ally of Hitler and anti-Semitic country with all the anti-Jewish laws. But those anti-Jewish laws didn't apply to my family, like I mentioned before. So first, I was able to go to a gymnasium. It was by chance a Catholic gymnasium, and without any problem I was accepted. So at that time also it turned out that the marriage between my father and wasn't so perfect. My father used to go to Budapest and supposedly had their liaison with some other woman, and so my parents didn't divorce, but they separated after 38, so it was maybe 39, and my mother left, and I was transferred from this gymnasium in Esztergom, that was a very historic town, to Debrecen, where my mother's sister and her husband are living. Debrecen is a quite large city in Hungary, and I was enrolled there in the gymnasium, and my mother lived in Budapest. And again, between 38 and 1944, early 1944, my life was quite pleasant in Hungary. My mother had a little money, so again, we were not affected by the anti-Jewish laws. And those anti-Jewish laws in Hungary were restrictive, discriminatory, but nobody was at that time taken to the prison or concentration camp. It all started only in the 1940s. And again, a big change to my life came in early 1944.
Well, before you get to 1944, I have one or two questions. We'll get to 44 in just a minute. I want to ask you about beginning of the war when Germany invaded Poland and Russia got busy also. Can you remember hearing about that and what was happening in the community around you? What did people think when the war started?
We were at that time already living under the fascist Hungarian. So most of the population, the Hungarian people, were enthusiastic about the success of Germany. So all those affected us in an emotional way. But my family wasn't affected by being restricted in any other way. In emotional way, very much. But again, I couldn't tell you some horrible stories because it didn't happen to my family. It all started only in 1944.
Were you aware before the war came to you? Were you aware of what was happening to the Jews under the Nazis?
Again, yes and no. No details. We knew in general that terrible things are happening to Jews. It was, if you listened, we listened to the radio from London, so we knew that but everybody thought that they are put to work somewhere, and once the war is over, they will return. It was a false and naive concept of what is going on, but nobody ever had this kind of experience. You know, we weren't like the Russian Jews who lived through pogroms. In our town or in Czechoslovakia, nothing of this sort ever happened. So we were just naive and maybe even stupid.
Can you now take us through the changes in 1944, step by step?
So in March 1944, and I wrote a column about it, and somebody else wrote a column about me. I was having high tea in a elegant hotel in Budapest with my girlfriend, and suddenly somebody stopped at our table and said, the German army just marched into Hungary and is occupying Hungary. Now, what happened was that the Allies were trying to split up the German coalition. And Hungary was part of it and was fighting on the Russian front against the Russians and losing thousands and thousands of soldiers. And the Germans learned that the Hungarian government wants to get out of the war and ask for a separate peace from the Allies. And so, to prevent it, the German army marched into Hungary in March 20th or so, I don't remember exact date. And I was at that time in Budapest. And like I said, at that time, the anti-Jewish laws didn't affect me. And my girlfriend was a Romanian, very beautiful girl, was not Jewish, and so and when we learned what, so for the first few weeks, nothing, but my mother got very uneasy that what can happen, and she returned to my hometown, to my father's house, and I followed. It is when I joined in Budapest, the Zionist, I was always, even as a youngster, member of the Zionist organization, Maccabi. It was a sport organization in my hometown. My father gave us a room with ping pong table and all kinds of sport equipment to participate in this Zionist group. Interestingly, many of those my friends whom I was in this Zion became, after Israel was born, became officials in the Israeli government and with high position. And also most of them during the war, during the Nazi occupation, became part of the anti-Nazi underground, what I was a member too. So, but going back to the question was that how the war going around us affected us. So, like I said, emotionally, and also because of my father's moving business, whoever they were refugees, Jewish refugees from Poland, coming into our town, and they all stayed with us until they could get to Hungary or Romania to escape Nazi persecution. So it was our involvement. I lost a little bit when in 1944 March, the Germans marched in. So I stayed in Budapest for about 2 more months and was helping the anti-Nazi underground because I could move very freely, helping them to assist Jews who were escaping the war from Poland, and my boss or whom I was associated with, Otto Komoy, who was the head of the Zionist-led rescue committee in Budapest. And what was my function, that the Swiss embassy or diplomats in Swiss smuggled into Hungary Napoleon's gold coins, Napoleon gold coins, and they were used to bribe high-ranking Hungarian officials. And to get it to them, they put the coins into a bag of flowers. It was already much later in the war. It was a shortage of food even in Hungary. And so the Napoleon was put into a bag, a 1 pound bag of, and I was asked to deliver it as a food help to a high-ranking fascist official. So, and also to fake IDs to Jewish families who were hiding in a non-Jewish household, but they were in danger of being discovered. So they had to have fake papers to get out. And so it was my job to deliver it. But it was getting dangerous for me, and I decided also to return to my hometown. And I stayed there for a while, and it is where a new chapter of my life started.
When did you go to Budapest?
Now,
When did you? Yeah, you mentioned your mother lived in Budapest. Did you go with her, and if so, when was that?
It was originally, we went to, after, I think so it must have been 1940. My mother went to Budapest. I went to Debrecen, to the gymnasium there. And I just visited my mother in Budapest during summer vacation or so. And we, and once I in end of 1949, I think I left Debrecen and went to live with my mother in Budapest. And again, I transferred to the school in Budapest. But it is when it was not safe for us anymore to stay in Budapest. And it is why when my mother returned to my hometown, and shortly after I returned too.
Can you share with us some of the policies that were enacted against the Jews?
What do you mean?
The government policies. What anti-Semitic laws were introduced?
Now,
How did things change in 44 with the policies towards Jews?
Now, up till 1944, as I said, my family was not affected by the anti-Jewish laws. All the other Jews were. And so it was, I felt always guilty and uneasy that I am not part of it, but if it was the case. I just live by it. But and I am coming back to 1944, because it is when the very drastical change came. So I was called up to the Hungarian army, and my family and I thought that I will, because of our papers that we are not considered Jews, that I will be induced, I was almost 18 years old, into the Hungarian army. And so when I reported at the base, and I showed the commander my papers that I am, what the Hungarian government issued, he tore it apart. And instead of inducing me into the Hungarian army and issuing a rifle, I was issued what you shovel and put into a cattle car and sent to a slave labor camp in Transylvania, what used to be Romania, but during the war also was incorporated into Hungary. And we, it always said it's for 40 men, the cattle car is for 40 men or eight horses. And when they shipped us to this Transylvania, there were maybe 100 of us in this cattle car, hardly space to lay down. So we arrived there, and it was a camp put up, and just wooden planks covered with straw, and it was our habitat for the next 6 months. And, you know, it wasn't an extermination camp. It was a labor camp. They needed us to build a railroad line for the German army over the rugged Carpathian Mountains. And to build they brought in 100,000 of train loads of clay. And you know, clay is very hard to lift. It's heavy. And to build the bed for then you had to, they arrived and they gave us only so much time to empty those railroad boxes from clay. And so when they put me to work, it would have killed me in a short order, because I wasn't so physically strongly built. And what saved me was that I know how to handle horses. As a kid, I had a pony, and I had to take care of him. And so all my fellow slave laborers, they were former doctors and professors and business people. They didn't know how to handle horses. And the commander of the camp needed a groom for his horses. So I was chosen, and it is what saved my life. I moved into the stables, and so I didn't have to go out to work, and I was taking the commander to the Romanian villages, and I befriended some Romanian peasants, and they gave me some extra food and old clothing, what again helped to save my life. Now, all around me, yeah.
Before you go further, I have one question I wanted to follow up on before you continue. You mentioned that you reported and you handed over your Hungarian papers, and they ripped them apart.
Yeah.
And okay, how did they know you were Jewish? Was there something in the papers that indicated your religion?
Yes, it was that the paper said that they are not considered like Jews. The laws don't apply. It was clearly stated, and I didn't deny it, but the commander didn't take it as an excuse.
Okay, so now we can go back to you're working with the horses.
Now,
You have an additional source of food coming in.
yeah, and I shared it with my friends there as much as I could, but it is what at the same time when I was having this job, what saved my life, I have seen what was going on around me. It was backbreaking work on starvation diet. People were dying around. If somebody couldn't fulfill the daily quota of work with the clay, they were beaten sometimes to death. People also died just from exhaustion. It was dead all around me. And I was saved because I was living in the stables with the horses, and so was spared of it. But I was very much aware of all of this. Funny and tragic thing, you know, horses, when they eat too much grass, fresh grass, their stomach blows up, and they want to lay down, and their stomach can burst. So when it happens, you cannot leave the horses to lay down. You have to chase them around till they start passing wind. And I had to take care of, it was one big horse and one smaller horse. And they both wanted to lay down and just be left alone. And I couldn't. I had to chase them around till they pass wind. And when it happened, it was my happiest day in the slave labor camp, because if they would have died, I would have died too. So it was just one episode in the labor camp. Another what I am quite proud of was that I have seen that people with broken legs were brought back from the working place. Actually, what happened when you build this railroad, you have to put down those railroad, iron railroad, what the train runs on, and it's very, very heavy. And usually they are tanks what 8 or 10 men carries on both sides. And there weren't any tanks. They had to put those heavy iron thing on your shoulder, and there wasn't any even a rug to put on your shoulder. So people sometimes just let it go, and it broke the legs, and once your legs was broken, you are useless. And so people are in terrible, terrible condition. And I have seen it, and I was in the stables, and for whatever reason, I decided to go out on the working the line and went to the commanding. It was a sergeant who had a whip in his hand, and he was a Hungarian army sergeant, but under Nazi control or order. and I said to him that I see what is going on and I would like to help out. And he looked at me that I am crazy or something, and he said, "No, go back to your horses." And shortly after, it was already late in the day, give order that I should stop working. So looking back to it, I felt quite proud of myself that even if I am not sure how much it helped, but I try to do something. So you have a question?
No, I'm just listening. Please continue.
So we stayed at this camp for about 6 months. Now, for me, it was not a really tragic time. I mean that physically I didn't suffer. I suffered emotionally because I was seeing what was going on. But after 6 months, the Red Army was moving up on the Balkans and was closing in. And so the Germans ordered us to evacuate and toward Budapest, because my group was a specialist in railroad building. So they took us to Budapest. First, we were marching day and night, forced march, and again people fall and died on the way, and finally arrived in Budapest on October 15, 1944. And the last 100 miles, they put us again into railroad cars and to ship us to Budapest. And when we arrived at the railroad station, the doors were all locked, where we were. And suddenly the Hungarian guards came and opened the door and let us get out. I didn't say anything, but it never happened before. It turned out that in October 15, there was a Hungarian uprising. The military wanted to get out of the war and chase the Germans out. It lasted, this uprising, just for a few hours, and the ultra-fascist Hungarian party, Nyilas party, they took over. And of course, they and hit Horthy, the governor. He was a regent of Hungary. Was taken as prisoner by the Germans, and the Nyilas took over. So it was October the 15th, and it was the most extremist government Hungary ever had. And they invited, of course, Eichmann right away arrived with his henchmen and started actually the deportation of Hungarian Jews from the countryside started much earlier. It was, but not in Budapest. Budapest was still a safe place for Jews. But in October 15, everything changed. And it is when Hitler and Nyilas took over, and and so we arrived this railroad, and we could have, or I could have, escaped at that time. but it was such a confusion that you didn't know what to do, where to go, how can you save yourself. So I stayed, and by nightfall they took us, this group, it was about 214 people originally in my group, who were specialists in building railroad tracks. They took us to abandoned, not mine, it is where you build, where the houses are built from. You know, what is the name? You know, where it has, it will come to me. Stone, not stone quarry, but it is where those house building things are made. So it is where they took us, and next day they employed us on the railroad tracks, what was leading to the last standing railroad bridge out of Budapest. And the British and American B-17s were trying to destroy the bridge, but it was so heavily defended by anti-aircraft guns that they had to fly too high, and they never hit it. But they managed sometimes to hit the railroad tracks, and they had to be repaired. And so our group was the one who did the repair job. And whenever the American and British bombers arrived, the guards, and again it was Hungarian military, but under German command, who chased us into the cornfields. They were both sides cornfields, and nobody was to harvest it, so the corn was high, and to hide there until the bombing was over. And they didn't want to save us, they wanted to save themselves. So each time, and when the bombing was over, we had to return to the work. So one day, in the meantime, we heard on the grapevine that our group will be also deported somewhere, and we knew it won't be a good place. So I decided to escape. So when they chased us into the cornfield, came the signal that the air raid is over. I didn't come out from the cornfield. I took off my prison garb and the yellow armband and yellow on my coat, and took it off, and I had under it the old clothing what the Romanian peasant gave me. And so I also had a cap what was, and I don't exactly know how I got it, but the fascist Hungarian youth was wearing. It was a cap, and so I put it on and crawled out from the cornfield and managed to get to the tram rail what was going into the inner city of Budapest. I didn't have any IDs, I didn't have any money, I had to be very careful, but I spoke Hungarian perfectly, so, and in my cap and what the peasant gave me, I looked like a young Hungarian youngster. And so I managed to get into the inner city, and I remember it was Vilmos Császár körút, it was Vilmos Császár boulevard, and to making sure that nobody is observing me or following me, I jumped off the moving tram before it came to a stop and run into the sidewalk. And it is where I run into the arms of my brother-in-law. Now, let's stop it. You have a question?
I'm just listening. Please continue.
So I just don't want to bore you. um, so I jumped off the tram and into my brother-in-law, my sister husband, my sister who was gassed on arrival to Auschwitz with her 3-month-old child. My brother-in-law was originally from Serbia, but again, part of it where they spoke Hungarian, and so he was taken into a slave labor camp in Bor. It was a famous copper mines, and also people there died like flies. It was one of the most terrible slave labor camps. And because of his language, he spoke German perfectly, Hungarian, Serb, so he was an interpreter there. So he was saved and managed to escape earlier than I did, a few months earlier, and managed to get to Budapest, and he joined the anti-Nazi Zionist-led underground in Budapest. And he was walking on the sidewalk, and Budapest had more than 1 million residents, and I was jumping up from a train, a tram, and jumped into his arms, literally. So he took me to the one of the safe houses set up by Raoul Wallenberg, the Swedish diplomat. I suppose everybody knows about him. Although he tragic death in a Soviet Gulag prison. So he took me to Raoul Wallenberg safe house, and I stayed for a few days. They supplied me with false IDs, and again I joined the Zionist group, what I was familiar with from my hometown and from my earlier stay in Budapest, and so I joined them. Now, again, at this point, I start a new chapter in my life. So you want to stop for a minute?
Let me ask you at this point, were you given a new name at this stage? Did you have now another name?
Absolutely Hungarian. I choose the name of one of the villages, Nana. Nana I. It was that he is from Nana. Nana I. I kept my Ferenc name. It's always very, and they asked me to choose a religion. So I choose evangelical, because most of Hungarians are Catholics, and I thought that if somebody questioned me, I wouldn't know enough about the Catholic, but they wouldn't know enough about evangelists. So instead of putting in evangelical, so I became an evangelist. So anyway, so it is what I got. I joined this Zionist group, and it is why I'm asking again, a new chapter started. Should I follow?
Please, unless you want to take a break,
No, I don't need a break.
please continue.
So having those papers, it was terrible, dangerous to live for a Jew with false papers, no paper in at that time. If they, if the fascist militia had set up roadblocks and checkpoints and the police everywhere. And so it is also what happened to me. At that time, it was after when I escaped. I didn't have yet the paper somehow. I were preparing, but I was on the street and was walking into, and I don't remember why, into a short street, what was connecting to wider streets. And I was already walking, and suddenly I noticed that the armed militia group closed off one entrance to the street, and I looked ahead, and there was the other end of the street was closed off also by the fascist militia. And they were coming next to each other and checking, everybody who was on the street, checking their IDs. And I was in the middle of it, and I don't know what to do. When suddenly I saw a door to one apartment house was open. So I went in and unleashed my shoes and again put it together, and I did it a few times. And when I felt that somebody can observe me, that what I am doing, so I had to go. So I finally decided to leave the house and came out, and the two groups already met, and it was clear for me to leave. But this experience gave me urge to find a more safe way than just depend on paper. So when I had my first false IDs, I marched into the office of the district leader of the Nyilas party. It was like the Hungarian Nazi party. I marched in and said to him that I am a good party member, Nazi party member, Hungarian Nazi party, who escaped from the Russians, and now I am here, and I need a job, and I need a shelter for me, a room somewhere. And he was looking at me and he said, "Aren't you by any chance a Jewish boy?" And I said to him, "Are you crazy? If I will be Jewish, I will be here in your office." And I said, "Do you want to show you that I am not Jewish?" And I started to unbutton my flea. At that time you didn't have zip, you have buttons. And he said, no, don't do it. Because the Hungarians were terribly afraid to be accused to be homosexuals. They would have been sent to concentration camp. So he gave me, or arranged that I got a room, a very elegant room in the former apartment of a Jewish financier. It was a luxurious apartment, a room, and gave a job in a small factory what was making aerial timers for the German Luftwaffe. And after a short time, I became a quality controller in this factory. And before a timer went out of I had to certify it that it is working correctly. And I sabotaged as many of it as I could. So I stayed in this factory working till the end of, but often, so it was my daytime job, but whenever with bombing, so I had million excuses why I couldn't go. And it is when I was delivering the false papers and the Napoleons, the bribe for the Zionist organization. Now, one thing again, what happened. At that time, the Hungarian government was mobilizing already every 16-year-old boy. They got a week training and were sent to the front to be cannon fodder. They died like flies. So my papers were made up. Just I was under 16 years old. But suddenly the Hungarian government changed the rules, and if you were close to 16, you had to go too. So I had to change the dates in my false paper. It was written in by ink, and you could change. They were chemicals what took out the ink, and it had to dry, and you can write in a different. And who was helping us, the Zionist organization, was a woman who was a technician in a private sanatorium in Buda. So they sent me there that she will do it. She will take out the ink and I can put in a new one and be 15 years old. And I started wearing short slacks to look much younger. So I went there and she took my papers into the lab and said it will be about a half an hour till it dries. And after we can write it in. And I didn't know, it turned out that the sanatorium was the doctors, the nurses, the patients, all were all Jews with false IDs. And so I was waiting till my ID dries, but suddenly I got very uneasy, and I don't know why. And I said, you know what, give me back the paper. I will wait till it dries, and I will myself write in. I just wanted to leave. So I left, and I was maybe 2 blocks away when suddenly I heard an army truck screechingly stop in front of the sanatorium. And a group of Nazi militia with weapons jumped out, and who was the leader of this group was a Dominican monk. His name was, I think so, Kuhn. He was executed after the war. And they ran into the hospital. And next day I read in the fascist newspaper that they did a wonderful job. They massacred every Jew in the sanatorium, and they just get rid of a place what was full of Jews. So I really just left in time. So it was a miracle. Now, in the meantime, I was working in this factory, delivering those things, and also sometimes manage to get into a restaurant. And one day I went into a restaurant to have lunch. It was still functioning. It was interesting. Hungary was always a agricultural country, so I had food. And I am going in, and I see at one table a red-haired boy with a group of fascist militia, and he dressed in fascist militia with a weapon by his leg. He was a Jewish boy whom I knew 2 years earlier. We were part of I don't know what kind of group. And he looked at me, I looked at him, and we managed to not to show any recognition or anything. But later I heard that he was quite heroic, that the Nazis often take people down to the Danube River to shot them, and I am telling right away the story about Vera, and he managed to save quite a few of those people. So anyway, what also happened in the meantime, and again, if you have a questions what I should answer?
I will take this opportunity, yes. Do you happen to know the name of the woman who was going to help you with the ink and the paper? Did you want to mention her name?
The woman, the technician, no, I don't know.
And the Dominican monk, did you mention his name?
I think so, it was Kuhn, K-U-N. But I am not sure, but it is, his name is well known because it was a trial after the war and he was executed. And it was described, this raid on this sanatorium somewhere else. The foundation will have some documents about it.
And the person who rescued some Jews who were being shot into the Danube, his name?
No, it is, I don't know the boy's name, but what happened, I had a friend from childhood friend, Vera, she used to spend the summer vacation in my hometown in Parka. But she was from Hungary, from Budapest. Her father was a famous lawyer. Her name was Vera Lefkowitz. So he was a champion swimmer in high school. And so during this anti-Nazi part, so from October 42, October 15, when I was operating as a underground, Vera was also part of my group, and also with false papers. And somehow she was hit in a dragnet, and it turned out that her papers weren't good enough, and so they took her to the headquarters of the Nyilas party. It was on Andrássy út, very famous boulevard in Budapest. It used to be the building, I think so, of a bank owned by a very wealthy Jewish banker. And the Nyilas party took it over and made it as their headquarters. And they used the basement as a holding pen and torture chamber. So it was later known that they took almost daily, always a group of 20 Jewish women down to at night down to the Danube River. It was January, and in was it no? It was not January, but the ice was flowing in the Danube River, and the Nazis, the Hungarian Nyilas, they lined up those women by the edge of the river. It was an embankment, and they forced them to take off all their clothing, only whatever remained, and they shot them, and they fall into the Danube River, and it has a very fast flow, and they just so Vera, who was a very good swimmer, before they had a chance to shoot, they jumped into the Danube River and went under the water and was swimming down, and the Danube took her. But it was so cold and full of ice, she couldn't stand it anymore, so she climbed out, and they were very elegant apartment houses along the bench of the Danube River. Very rich people lived there. But it was a costume that each house had a janitor who had the key to the house. At 10 o'clock at night, the doors were closed, and even the resident had to ring the bell, and the janitor came and opened the door, and he was paid for it extra. So Vera couldn't stand anymore the cold, and she was in her underwear. So she rang the bell of the first house, and the janitor came and looked at her and wanted to close the door, but she said, "If you save me, you will be richly rewarded, and if I die, it will be on your conscience." And the janitor was first hesitating, but after said, "Come on in," took her in. He has a small apartment on the first floor, and so Vera was safe. And she said to me, "I have a friend who will help, who will pay you and reward you, and he will help me to get clothing." So next day, the man came to my place, and a note from Vera that what I should do to abort him. But it was interesting. Everybody knew that those janitors used to or were police informer. So Vera said, "Don't pay him now. When when you bring me the clothing and I am it is when he will be paid, that he should not betray us." So it is, and so I did everything she asked, and years and years later, with my wife, we visited Israel, and Vera was already living there. She was married and had a very handsome boy. So it was wonderful to see her alive and happy. So it is one small part what happened. You had to make decisions by the minute, not by the hour, by the minute, how to stay alive. One thing what I also remember, and are not too proud of it, I was walking on the street, and I think so, the street name was Vasutsa, iron, and so on one side of the street, it wasn't a very wide street, and suddenly Russian cannon gun hit, must have been a big chunk, hit the wall of this building, and a big chunk of concrete fall out, and the man was walking next to the house, and this big chunk hit his head, and he fall down and was bleeding, and I was on the opposite side of the road walking on the street, and my first instinct was just run and try to help him. Maybe, and in the last minute, if I go there, the police will come and they will write up a protocol and they will ask for my ID and all the complication what could happen. And I just stood frozen. But in the meantime, other people who were close by went to help him. But it wasn't any help. He was dead already, and it hit. So it is something what I am not so proud of myself that but it was something what you had to do. Now, I think so I will come to the last episode because most of the things what I was telling you happened all over again. You know, each delivery of a Napoleon or a false ID was fraught with absolute danger. You never know if somebody will not betray you or somebody will not stop you. So you had to make a decision minute by minute. So what happened in the last 2 weeks of siege of Budapest? Budapest was sealed off and it was bombarded. So I couldn't go to, again, a little backstep. So in this last phase of the war, I felt very endangered. And I thought, for me, the best will be if I really hide in plain daylight. And I rented, I had a room. It was what the Nazi or Nyilas leader recommended me. But I don't felt safe anymore there. So I decided to rent a bed. It was very common at that time in Budapest. It was a great shortage of housing to rent a bed. And it was a janitor on one of the big apartment houses who had a 3-room apartment on the first floor, and he rented out 1 room to workers. So there were 5 beds in this room. It was a quite large room. 5 beds, and 4 Hungarian working men were renting each one of the rooms, and I rented one of them. And I was told that the son of this janitor is one of the leaders of the death squad, death squad. The main job is to hunt down Jews. So I thought nobody will believe that a Jew will look for shelter in the house of his potential killer. So I thought it will be. So I rented a room, and I had a paper box suitcase where all my little extra clothing was, and so. And I felt safe in this house because nobody ever bothered me. And during the day, I went to the factory, and I knew that I am a factory worker in one of those places, so I felt safe. But there was a curfew in Budapest at 6 o'clock. If you were on the street and you weren't having legitimate reason with a piece of paper to prove it. They could shot you on the spot, and of course they will investigate. So I made a rule that by 5 o'clock I should be back at my bed and stay there until the morning. And at one time, at that time, I had this Romanian girlfriend who had a room in one of the close by apartment building. And so when I couldn't go to the factory, I stayed in her house. But it was bombing day and night, so everybody was staying in the basement. And so we stayed in the basement too. And so this particular day, I lingered around. I don't know really why. And so instead of 5 o'clock to be back in the apartment, I stayed longer. And it was maybe 5:20 or 5:30 when I arrived home. And when I entered the courtyard, it was an absolute bedlam. Aerial bomb, a Russian aerial bomb, hit the apartment, actually the room and the kitchen of where I was. My 4 roommates there were dead. Everything was in shambles. Only my paper suitcase under the bed, I found it. It was undamaged, so I pulled it out and took it and went to stay with my girlfriend in the basement. And 2 weeks later, the Russian Soviet squad burns into the basement and liberated us. And I was the only one who could talk to them because I speak Czech and it's Slav languages. And so it was my liberation in Budapest. I think so. It is the end of my story. What time is it?
Why don't we take a break now?
Okay.
Okay, let's stop for a few minutes. We'll take a break.
All right, we're cut.
Okay, we're back after a short break. And I wanted to flesh out a little bit more about some of the things that you were doing. When we had spoken before, before today, you had mentioned Kastner. Can you tell us about Kastner?
Yeah. Now, my direct contact and frequent contact was Otto Komoy, who was the head of the rescue committee. And later, Rezső Kastner took over, all our partners. So I mostly worked for Komoy, but often Kastner was asked to help out Kastner also to deliver bribes and false paper. But once I was asked to accompany Kastner, and I wasn't told where, to a suitcase to Eichmann. It turned out that it was Eichmann, but actually it was a SS major or captain, was an assistant to Eichmann, whom we delivered a suitcase full of gold and precious stones. It was a bribe to let 3,000 Jews, Budapest, Hungarian Jews, instead of shipping them to Auschwitz, to Switzerland. And the negotiation went on. I was involved only, I was a shames, I was a schlepper to him. I didn't do, I was just helping. I suppose it was just for prestige reasons that Kastner didn't have to carry the suitcase. And so this saving the 3,000 Jews, in the end, only 1,800 of them managed to get to Switzerland, but they was saved. Now, what is interesting is Dr. Kastner was a Hungarian journalist, and after the war, he became the editor of a Hungarian newspaper in Israel. Új Kelet is New East is the name of the newspaper. And after we escaped from communist Czechoslovakia, I was writing stories, and it was published in this Hungarian newspaper in Israel, and it was Kastner who. Now I met up with Kastner in Israel, and you may know about it. He was accused to negotiate with Eichmann, that it was a betrayal and so on. So at that time, when we were in Israel, I offered him that I will testify on his behalf because that I knew what he was doing, and it was really not collaborating with the Nazis, but saving Jewish lives. But he said, no, it is such a open and shut case that I don't need your testimony. So I never did. And of course, you know, it was after he was assassinated, Kastner, in Israel. So it was my connection with him during the Holocaust was not very close. It was I was helping him only out here and there.
Is there anything else that you want to share with us about your time under in the war before the Russian liberation, and then we'll go into liberation in just a minute?
You know, I myself don't know how to put it in. I don't remember the dates when it happened, and often I was wondering where the apartment house was where I lived, or where was the. But it's all, everything is 80 years old, and it's blurry. The main things are still clear in my mind, but the little details are blurry.
You mentioned the fate of some of your family members, but can you please go over all of them? You talked about your sister and her child, your stepsister and her child, and your stepbrother. What happened to the rest of your family?
Now, yes, each one has a story. So when it was again October 15 when I arrived to Budapest. I didn't know anything what happened to my family. They didn't know what happened to me. Some friends of my parents, my father and mother, still lived together in my hometown. And up till this time, they were protected. Both of them were protected. And on after the Nazis, the Nyilas took over, some Hungarian officials were telling my father, my mother wasn't involved in it, that you go into hiding because the Nazis will limit all your papers won't be gone. So my father decided he had an employee, a long time employee, who had my father had many people working for him, and this one was working for decades, and he had a little vineyard out of a few miles out of Parkan, and there was a wine cellar in the vineyard, and he said, you and your wife should go there. The Russians weren't too far at that time. Everybody was expecting that they will be there, but it took longer than they. So anyway, he offered to hide them in this wine cellar. And my father, he said, and I will bring you food every day or whenever I can, and you will be safe there, both of you. And my father accepted it, but my mother said, I cannot see myself living in a third floor wine cellar, and I have a childhood friend who was the prioress of a Carmelite monastery in Budapest. And my mother was in touch with her, and she always said, if you need my help, you can come to my monastery and I will take care of you. So my mother decided that in the morning she will take the train to Budapest and will go to her friend. So my father went to the wine cellar. The workman took him there. My mother refused to, that she will leave for in the morning. During the night, a Hungarian gendarme who were doing the roundup of Jews for the Germans, they came and took him, and she was taken to the Flossenburg concentration camp in Germany. And the Germans were also persecuting the gypsies, and in Parkan there was a group of gypsies living there forever, and each Friday a group of those gypsy women came to our house, and my mother gave them food and money, and so it was, I remember it from my childhood, it was every Friday forever. And so those gypsy women knew my, so they were also deported, and one of them in the Flossenburg concentration camp and met my mother, and when after the war she came back and she said she died of starvation in the Flossenburg Park. My father survived in the wine cellar. He came back, and our house, we had a big house, and it was full of furniture. So when she came back, it was all empty. It was all, but people suddenly started to bring back furniture because they said we wanted to save it. So who knows? But my brother was taken to also a slave labor camp, actually to the Russian front. But he was a very athletic guy, a big guy, but finally he wound up in the, I think so it's a Buchenwald concentration camp, and he came home a few months later than the war was already over as a 40-pound skeleton. But he survived, and later he immigrated to Israel and died there.
when did you first begin to realize the scope of the genocide?
It's really only after the war when people came back and was telling us. Up till now, it was all very sketchy. We all thought that the German needed workers, that they will put Jews to work and they will survive. Nobody, I didn't even hear about Auschwitz, wasn't aware of it, that this extermination camp existed. It was, we were as blind as can be. In spite of it, that we experienced that you can be shot on the street for no reason at all. We were not aware of it, what can happen with a mass execution of people.
So you told us about your liberation. What steps did you take to rebuild your life after the war, now under the Russians?
Now, when there is also a little story about this liberation. So when the Russian soldiers, under the command of a wise old sergeant, burst into our basement, they started shooting, shouting, and pointing the weapons at us, but Hungarian didn't know a word Russian. So I was the only one who could talk to them because I spoke Czech, Czechoslovak, and Slovak. So the Slavic languages are similar in a way, so I could understand. So what I wanted, there was a rule during the war that every big apartment house had to have a part of the wall in the basement built that it should be easy to break through. In case the bomb hit the apartment building and you have to escape, evacuate, you can go to the next building and take shelter there. So it was a rule. So the Russian figured out that Budapest at that time was like Stalingrad. Every building was a fortress, and the SS was waiting there for the Russians to attack. And in fact, there were twice so many Russian casualties during the siege of Budapest than German or Hungarian, because the SS was defending them. So the Russian figured that if they move through the basement and break through the walls, they can come up behind the Nazis, the SS, and surprise them from the back. So those Russian soldiers who came into orbit couldn't break through. The wall didn't give. So the Russian sergeant told me, go up. It was at night, and it was winter. It was January, early, cold and dark. And he said, go up the street and run to the next building and open up from the other side. And so it wasn't a request, it was an order to do it. So I did, and I ran by the wall, and also tracer bullet were giving any light, and I jumped into the door was open in the apartment building, and suddenly I heard somebody saying, "Spion, spion." It meant in Russian, spy, spy. And so, I suddenly felt Kalashnikov, or at that time it was a different weapon, in my ribs. And I started shouting, I am not a spion, I am a Jew. And suddenly somebody from the back said, Yakov, иди сюда. It's a Yakov, come here. And so Yakov came, and he was a Jewish soldier, and he said to me, say something in Hebrew. And I was a lapsed Jew. I didn't, but if you are in a situation like that, you suddenly remember things. And I remember Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu. It is God, and so the Jewish soldier gave me a hug and went into his pocket and took out a piece of bread and sausage and gave it to me. So it turned out that the house was already occupied by Russians, and so I didn't need to break through. So I went back to our apartment building, and I told the sergeant that it's not necessary. So they left, but a few hours later he came back with a sack of flour. You know, it was at that time Budapest was famine. It was a sack like that was worth more than gold, and he gave it to me as a reward for what I did for him. And so I distributed it between my fellow residents. In the meantime, so because I speak, it somehow the Russian command, they learned about it, because very few Hungarians speak a word, and I became a translator to a Russian general. And so he was my boss, and he gave me a paper, and with lots of Russian loved stamps, a lot of that, and it says that I am working for the Russian command, I am an interpreter, and I can come and go, and so, and with a lot of, and many Russians didn't know how to read, but they can see the big stamp. So it was my passport. After I left, went home, and wanted to go to Austria or back to Hungary, or I can use it like a passport. So I was a translator for him for a while, and when they moved away, so I went back to my hometown. Now, only my father was alive, nobody else. A half dozen or a dozen, I don't even know other number, my aunt, uncles, cousins, they all perished. Nobody came back. And of course, my mother and my sister and her baby, and Bela, my sister's husband, who saved me again in Budapest, he died after the war. And some people said he died of broken heart. But so nobody from my family was alive anymore.
I had asked you a moment ago, what steps did you take to rebuild your life? Were you able to get more education?
I went back to Prague and was studying for journalism and economy in Prague. But in the meantime, because I was fluent in Hungarian, I obtained also as a foreign correspondent, Prague-based foreign correspondent for the Hungarian newspaper Világosság. It was official paper for the Hungarian Social Democratic Party. And so I was accredited as a foreign correspondent in Prague and had all kinds of privileges, got free theater ticket and everything else. So I had this, and finally it's interesting when I was in Antwerp when the Czech in 19. So I lived in Prague between 1945 and in 1954 with my wife we escaped from communist Czechoslovakia. But during this, when I was living in Prague, and as a foreign correspondent, we had a quite privileged life. But I was so used to somehow, and when the Stalinist nightmare descended on Czechoslovakia with all the persecution of people, and people just disappeared from the street. It was the Stalinist nightmare. I joined the anti-communist underground. It wasn't a formal thing, but I was helping people escape. Now, at that time also, I was in stick with the Israeli ambassador in Prague and became a kind of operative for the Mossad to help them. I gave them information about, and also to help people escape from who wanted to go to Israel, to escape, because I had the ability to move around. And here is again, Erika is my cousin who lives now in California, in Venice, California, Erika Fabian. She is a child survivor of the Holocaust. She was 4 years old when the Holocaust started. And her father was a wealthy businessman. He was taken to a slave labor camp and died there. Erika and her sister, who was 3 years older, and her mother, the widow of my cousin, Erika's father was my cousin, wanted to get out of communist Hungary. And so they hired a smuggler who to take them to Austria. But the frontier between Hungary and Austria was so heavily mined that it was impossible to escape there. So what they did, from Hungary, they entered Slovakia, and by Bratislava, they smuggled out to Austria. And so they signed up, and 20 other people were in the group, also some nuns, and the smuggler took them first to Slovakia, and from there was supposed to Austria. It was again in 54, I think so, in the winter, in 54 or 50, no, it was 53, in 53, in the winter. It was the height of the Cold War. More people died trying to escape than in a small war. So Erika, her mother and sister were in this group. And once they were trying to enter the no man's zone between Czechoslovakia and Austria, the border guards started shooting, and they have German Shepherd dogs, and so 2 or 3 people were killed, and the rest were arrested, and so taken to the prison in Bratislava. Now, at that time, if you try to escape, you got a minimum of sentence 10 years in prison. So the 3 women were in prison, and suddenly I got a postcard from Bratislava in Hungarian and addressed to Frank Schatz or František Schatz, journalist, Prague. And it was all the address. But because it was a journalist, they delivered it to the Organization of Foreign Correspondents in Prague. They called me and said, here you have a card, but we cannot read it. It is in Hungarian. And the card said, we are, my 2 daughters and I am in Bratislava, and we need your help. Can you help us? And her name, Piroshka. And there was, I look at the back address, and in the phone book I found it was the central prison in Bratislava. And so I right away took the night train. It was a night ride to Bratislava. And in the morning I appeared by the prison gates and asked to talk to her. And they let me talk to her. And she said, we escaped from Hungary, but it is what happened to us, and can you help us? So I have all kinds of connections as a foreign correspondent in Prague, and arranged that the 2 girls, Judy was 13 years old and Erika was 13 years old and Judy was 16 years old. And I arranged that the 2 girls can come with me to Prague, and I will take care of them. And I couldn't get a mother out of prison, but I arranged that she got extra food and so on. So the 2 girls came with me, and they stayed for over half a year. And Stalin died in the meantime, and the regime got softer, and I arranged that the Czech government notified the Hungary that the 2 Jewish women wanted to go to Israel, where they had the only family, and so they didn't want to go to the evil West. They wanted to go to. So they were taken back to Hungary and spent months in prison and were let to go. Now, when the Hungarian uprising was in 1956, they again escaped, and this time they managed to get to Austria and finally to America. But I lost contact with them, and 65 years later, 60 or 65 years, suddenly my editor got a phone call from Erika and said, is Frank Schatz a Holocaust survivor? So it turned out she found me and after 65 years ago, and she came to visit, and since then we are in, and I visited her in California, and since then we are in touch. Every single day we write each other and call each other and found family. So, and Erika, in the meantime, she became a writer. She has 26 books published. Her son is a world-famous eye doctor in London, And the second son is a filmmaker. Did you see Mrs. Harris Goes to Paris, the movie? So he was the producer and director of the movie. It was very popular movie. It's a good film movie. So with Erica, it is. So we catch up after 65 years.
Can you give us Erica's last name?
Pardon?
Her last name, Erica's last name.
Erica Fabian. Fabian. F-A-B-E-N. Maybe you can interview her. She has a wonderful story.
So what happens now next with you?
Now,
Somehow you came to the United States. So can you take us
so
on your journey?
in 1954, Erica and her mother and sister, they went back to Hungary. And it is when I lost contact with them. And but I was at that time already involved in this anti-communist underground to helping people escape, and also in touch with the Mossad at the Israeli embassy. So at one point, the police came for me a year earlier. It was before Erica and her sister came to. I was already involved in this anti-communist thing, and they came. Somebody must have denounced me, and they made a search of I was married to Yarka, so I have to go back a little bit. So in 1948, I met Yarka Jaroslava Křemenáko, a Czech girl, a Christian Czech girl. So when a beautiful girl, smart, everything, and so I fall in love with her. But before I say yes to anything, I wanted to know if she is not an anti-Semite. Nobody ever in her family was Jewish. And so I asked pointed questions, and she had absolute no anti-Jewish feelings, exactly the opposite. And she passes every test with flying color. So we got married in 1948, and she was secretary to the deputy minister of trade in Prague, and I was this foreign correspondent. So we had a quite privileged life. We were financially, I got well paid from the newspaper. So we were, but what went on around us, that people whom we knew disappeared for no reason at all. So I was, and suddenly somebody must have denounced me. So the police came and made a search at the house. I didn't need a paper to show, I just did it. And luckily, I had copies of letters from high-ranking communists whom I interviewed, and articles what I wrote, and but nevertheless, and I didn't find anything incriminating. But they said they have to take me to the for interrogation to the secret police, and they just were interested in me. But Yarka insisted that she is coming. She doesn't let me go alone. So finally I gave in. And in the end, it turned out it was good that she came because I kept her in a different room. They interrogated me. They went to her to check out what I said. And she, of course, confirmed everything what I said. So in the morning, they let me know. And so I was safe. But a year later, I was notified from some that I am again in danger. So it was arranged that we should escape. And we escaped by false passport. Interesting, they gave us French passport, and we didn't speak a word French. And so what we said, my wife was Christian, didn't know a word Yiddish, that we said we are Jews from Eastern Poland and we talk only Yiddish. So they couldn't talk to us. And we managed to get to Sweden through Poland and East Germany on a train. And what I did, or they gave us mayonnaise and American condiments, what you couldn't buy anywhere in a communist country. And we were supposed to travel on the express from Vienna to Stockholm. And so when we came to the border, to each border from Czechoslovakia to Poland and from Poland to Israel, I put out an offer to our fellow traveler, the American mayonnaise I was given, because it proved that we are coming from the West, that we are not escaping. And it helped a lot because I see that. So we arrived to Sweden and happily, first time we were really safe, and we didn't know really where we want to settle. We could have stayed in Sweden, could have gone to Switzerland. So anyway, for a few years after we were wandering around Western Europe, I was selling articles for different magazines everywhere, visited Israel, and it is when I met again Kastner. And so we finally, in 1958, asked my aunt, who lived in West Virginia, to send us an affidavit to come to America. We looked at America as a shining city on the hill, and we could have stayed anywhere in Europe, but we decided to come to America and arrived here as refugees from communist Czechoslovakia. And again, what happened, my cousin who lived in Kew Gardens in Queens, in New York, she was supposed to come to the port. We arrived on Queen Mary, the old Queen Mary, and she was supposed to wait and took us to her home in Queens. But she gave a birth 2 days before to a child. So she who came to wait for was a lady from HIAS, the Jewish organization, travel organization. And she said she will put us in a taxi, and the taxi will take us to Queens, to my cousin's house. And so introduce us to the taxi driver, who was from Italian family. And he asked, from where are we? So when we said that we are refugees from communist Czechoslovakia, he said, I won't take you right away to Queens. First I will show you United Nations, Macy, the Times Square, all those things, Central Park, and it will be on the house. I don't charge you anything for it. And it is what he did. So this was our introduction to America, a very good one. And we went to my cousin's house, and I right away wanted to have a job and be on our own. So my cousin's husband was an assistant and speechwriter to the president of IBM. He was a great economist and smart guy and everything. And I said that I need, and he said, no, you have to go to an employment agency and they will recommend. Now, way back, I learned I was included in the Czech army, Czech Air Force, and I learned, but only for a very short while, then I got out of it, how to test and repair aircraft instrument, altimeter and things like that. And so when I came to America, my English wasn't good at all, so I said I would look for a job like that. So my smart cousin, husband, said, you have to go to employment agency. And so I went one, and I right away recommended a company, but I wanted, I think so, a half a year salary as a for the competition, for compliment. Anyway, I said I won't pay it. But I heard in the meantime that the Yellow Pages existed. So I looked up in the Yellow Pages the companies that repaired and sold those instruments. But I couldn't talk to them, so I went to HIAS and I said, help me to find. And said, we are not an employment. I said, you don't need to just look at the Yellow Pages and go. So I called up and they sent me to Pan American. Pan American had a center at that time. It was not called the Kennedy Airport. It was Idleville. And so the shop manager, he gave me an altimeter to look at it, what is wrong with it. And you know what the altimeter is in the airplane, so it shows how high is it, the airplane. And when the airplane has a hard landing, this altimeter has a little glass, what they call a jewel, where the flywheel is moving around, and it breaks the glass bead when it lands hard. So you have to, and it is embedded in a little metal bridge. And to replace this bridge costs $25. And so it is what Pan American always did. And when the manager showed me, I said, it is the broken jewel what need to be replaced. And so he wanted to give me the bridge. And I said, I don't need the bridge. I just need the little glass. and the bridge cost $25, the little glass cost 50 cents. So I punched out the broken one and put in the new one, and I was hired on the spot. So I became a technician there. Now, it has a second story to it. Should I say it now or later? Later. So it is how started my American career, but it didn't last long. I became editor of the Hungarian language in Cleveland, Ohio. You have a question?
Hey, I wanted to go on a little bit. I wanted to ask you how you were received by the American people. Did you experience any anti-Semitism or any anti-foreign sentiments when you came?
No, not at that time and not later. I have to say that my experience was as good as can be. No, I was never turned down for a job. I was never said a bad word. I don't know if it was because of my attitude toward people that I didn't provoke them, or it was just I was just a lucky guy.
Clearly, very lucky. Are you an American citizen?
Yes, at the moment I was eligible. We both, my wife and I, become. And it's also a little bit of an interesting thing. My wife, you have to 5 years till you became a citizen, and so I passed all that. But it turned out that my thumb didn't come up right. So my wife got the citizenship, and I had to wait a month longer. But when I got my citizenship, it was a federal judge from Italian background or whatever, and he gave us a party and made it really so festive that I remember it since today, how I get. And when I was asked to swear in new citizens here at Colonial Williamsburg, I made it sure that it will be a party for them to remember it.
Esther, I'm going to cut.
Okay, we had a brief break there for a minute, but we're back. I had asked you about your becoming an American citizen. What is it like for you, given what you went through? What is it like for you to be an American citizen?
It made a lot. First of all, you feel it. I feel privileged to be an American citizen. I am not a blind citizen that I think everything is perfect or so, but like Churchill used to say about democracy, that it's not perfect, but it's better than anything else. So my experience of living under so many different regimes, I will still say that with all the negatives, America is still the best. And I am glad to live here. I am a patriot, American patriot, not a blind one, but I'm willing to sacrifice for this country.
You told me previously that you have met some very famous people. You've met Kissinger, Margaret Thatcher. Can you tell us how you got to meet these people?
Through those two people, through William and Mary. So if you will ask me or let me tell you, so after we after I was editor of the Hungarian paper in Cleveland, it was a prestigious job, but we didn't like Cleveland. Cleveland was dirty, and at one time the Cuyahoga River caught fire. And so we said, why to live in a place like that? We went on a vacation to the Adirondack Mountains and to Lake Placid, New York, where the Winter Olympics, 2 Winter Olympics took place. And we were always great hikers, and the nature was very important to us. And we decided to settle in Lake Placid. But how to make a living as a Hungarian journalist in the Adirondack Mountains, I couldn't make a living. But my wife was a fashion designer way back. And so, and she was also a good businesswoman. And we opened a leather goods store in Lake Placid on the main street. And first we made mistakes that bought the wrong merchandise, but soon fixed it, and we became prosperous. We went back to Europe for many, many years, in the spring to Europe, in the fall to Bermuda, and we had a good life. But so while we were in Europe, I don't know if you ever heard of Emery Reeves. He's author of Anatomy of Peace. Albert Einstein called his book the answer to how to save the world from a nuclear holocaust. And Emery Reeves also became a publisher and close friend of Winston Churchill. He wrote this book, and I read it first in a Czech translation. And his book became my Bible. I wanted to be his followers. So when we went back to Europe on a vacation 1 year, I learned that he lives at a palatial villa on the French Riviera, just above Monte Carlo. So I wanted to meet him, and he had an unlisted phone number, and I tried to bribe a French postal worker to give me his number, but couldn't. But he gave me his address, and so I drove up to his palatial home, and he had he was married at that time to Wendy Reeves. She was one of the top models in America. And so when I arrived to their house, there were 3 Italian gardeners who were taking care of acres of flowers. And I asked about him, and they showed me a door. And it turned out the door, it was a back door. And I ring the door, and somebody opened it up. And I said, I would like to talk to Emery Reeves. And the man said, he's not at home. And why do you want to see him? And I said, because he is my hero. His book had became my Bible. And he said, I am Mr. Reeves. And he said, I can see you for 10 minutes, and we can meet a little later in the Hotel de Paris, but for 10 minutes. So I went to our place to bring Yarka, my wife. I wanted her to meet him, and we meet at the Hotel de Paris in Monte Carlo. and the 10 minutes turned into 3 hours, and we became close friends. And each time when we went to Riviera, we get together and so on. So anyway, after so we made some money in Lake Placid, and especially during the Olympics, the 1980 Olympics. I was involved very much in the Olympic. I organized the Olympic people-to-people program, and decided, and I went on a vacation and came to, actually we went to Monticello in Charlottesville, but stopped in Williamsburg and fall in love with Williamsburg and decided to buy here a second home. And so it is when we bought this condo. And what made Williamsburg so special for us was the College of William and Mary, the walking in the historic area, and the climate. So we bought the condominium, and I became friends with professors from William and Mary, and I heard that they want to establish a Center for International Studies. They had all kinds of law school, but nothing in international. And I was always interested in it. And by absolute chance, I got a letter from Wendy Reeves, the widow of Emery Reeves, who died in Switzerland, and said, I just gave to the Dallas Museum, because Emery was a great art collector, and gave a collection to the Dallas Museum of Art, what is now worth $470 million. But Wendy said to me, he was a thinker, Emery, and I would like to establish something, a memorial for him, what shows his intellect. And it was when William and Mary decided to have this. So I introduced them, and Wendy gave them $3 million as an endowment. It was the largest, it was 30 years ago. It was the largest endowment what William and Mary got in 300 years of existence. And suddenly people, when they saw that such money is coming, they started a new fundraiser for 150 million, after for 500, and now they have more than $1 billion in the coffers. So I became a member of the President Council at William and Mary and the advisory board of the Reef Center. So I have very close connections with William. And I write periodically about what is going on at the college.
Have you spoken and written about your wartime experiences?
I wrote columns here and there, but and also a book. I wrote not only about the wartime, but also what happened to me in America. Essays, really. It's and Alan Zulo, who is a writer with 50 books to his name, Alan Zulo, and is the heroes of the Holocaust. He wrote a book for the Scholastic, and it is distributed in every school in United States. And one chapter is about my experiences during the Holocaust. And now William Walker, who is a historian, and he wrote the book betrayal at Little Gibraltar. And it's a very well-received historical book about the largest battle in the First World War. He is a personal friend, and he is writing my biography. He visited already Prague, he visited my hometown, he visited Budapest, and he has maybe 20 audio tapes interviewing me. But he is not in good health now, but he is working on the book.
I wanted to ask you a few questions about more contemporary history. Given your personal life experience, what are your thoughts about the Russian invasion of Ukraine?
Now, it is repeating, history repeats itself. I think so it was Marx who said, first it is tragedy, the second time it's a force. What Putin is doing is repeating the same thing what Hitler did, attacking a country what didn't do any harm to him. It is a personal war of there is no reason why Russia should attack Ukraine.
Can you comment about Hamas and the attack on Israel and this current rise in anti-Semitism?
Now, it is also, my answer is what wouldn't please everybody, but it is how I feel about it. Israel, after the Holocaust, became the last and safe haven for Jews who are persecuted or in danger anywhere in the world. So the existence of Israel is an existential need for all the Jews everywhere in the world. Now, what happened, what was it, October 7 in Israel, it was that Jews were massacred en masse the first time since the Holocaust. So it brought back everything else. Now, Hamas is a murderous organization, but doesn't make a secret out of it that it wants to destroy Israel and push the Jews into the sea. So after October, Israel has to restore deterrence. I have a friend, General Mike Loch, who was the Vice Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force, and at what time he was in command of 3,624 aircraft and 176,000 airmen. And he was also the developer of the F-16 fighter bombers, the most popular and the most sought airplane in the world. So he's a friend of mine, we often have coffee. And I ask him how he feels about Hamas and the Gaza war. And he says, if Israel wants to survive and remain an independent state, it has to restore his deterrence. It means that all the enemies who surround it have to fear what will happen to them if they attack Israel. And what Israel is doing now is restoring this deterrence. The Hezbollah didn't attack Israel for the only reason because they don't want it should happen to Lebanon what happened to Gaza. And it is what Israel is doing now, restoring deterrence. It's very sad. I feel very sorry for the children and the innocent people, but it is something what, regardless of what America or even the Jewish leaders say, I think that the Israeli people, the voters, are the only one who should decide what should be Israel policy in Gaza, because they are the one who die and give their blood. Everybody else is just an armchair strategist.
Is there anything you want to add before we conclude? Do you feel any unfinished topics?
I feel that, and I said it many times, that answer to anti-Semitism and it not to keep silent. You have to call it out. You have to. For 40 years, I never talked about my experience during the Second World War. And I was interested only in the present and the future. But when the anti-Semite, the Holocaust deniers came out of the woodwork, it is why when I decided to speak up, to write about it, and to just bear witness. I think it is the only way how you can teach future generation to think about it in terms of an individual. Stalin used to say that the death of one person is a tragedy, but of 1,000 persons is a statistic. So if you look at the Holocaust only as statistic, 6 million people, it doesn't have the same impact if you hear the personal story or read them, because we are, or I am now really the last generation who can say, I was there, I witnessed it. After us, there will be museums, books, films, but nobody who can say, I was there. So it is why I feel as my last mission in life to talk to the Shoah Foundation and tell it as it is. I am not exaggerating, I am not making of it more than what I witnessed, but I feel I have to bear witness.
My last question to you, sir. What message do you have for future viewers of this interview?
Again, there is no one solution fits all. It is all personal. I feel, first of all, organizations like the Shoah are doing the right thing to keep the tragedy alive. It shouldn't be just a statistic in historical books. The second is to work with well-meaning people. There are millions and millions of people in the United States and all over the world who are fair-minded, who are ready to help their fellow human beings, and you should use the contact, networking. It is the same like you do. You build friendships, on a personal level. So you should do it on a social level. Build friendships and spread the word that you can be just and still not to be a softy. It is to be a human being is more than just dimension.
Thank you for speaking with us today.
It is my pleasure.
Sir, can you tell us what are we looking at here?
It is my hometown on the Danube River. It is on the Czechoslovak. It was on the Czechoslovak side of the Danube River. Opposite is in Hungary, Esztergom, and the bridge, what you can see on the photo, leads through from one side of the river to the next. It's Esztergom is a very historical city. Now, originally, my hometown was called Parkan, and after the war, when it became Czechoslovakia again, it was renamed to Sturovo. He's a famous Slovak poet, he was. So it is where I grew up, and my memories of it, part of my memories are good, part of it are very bad. I never went back to visit it.
And do you know when these pictures were taken?
Must have been after the war, because it's named Sturovo, and there were postcards what somebody sent it to me. So it was after the war,
After World War II.
after World War II.
Thank you. Can you tell us about this picture, please?
Now, this picture is me, Frank Schatz, and it was taken when I was surviving the Holocaust. This photo was used on my fake IDs. And as you can see, I look like a Hungarian youngster, and so it helped me to survive. I am fond of this photo because it is describing part of my life.
So as I recall, you mentioned in your testimony, this would have been, what, 1944?
44. It was 44. I am not sure if it was. It must have been in the later part of 44.
Thank you. And who is this, please?
It is my father, Edmund Schatz. And I think so this photo was taken after the war, when he lived for a short time in Esztergom, Hungary, before he immigrated to Israel, where he died. He was a very handsome and successful businessman, and no wonder that my mother fell in love with him. He was a very smart man, and I am proud of him.
Thank you. And who is this?
It's my mother, Charlotte. What's her name? Abrani, her maiden name, Schatz. She was a very beautiful woman. She was a teacher, and before she married my father, she was a teacher in one of Budapest elite schools. Her students were the children of Hungarian aristocrats and very wealthy people. And at one point, she was engaged to the son of the Hyderabad, the Nizam, the Maharaja of Hyderabad. When my grandfather learned about it, he said, only through my dead body, because they are Muslims, and you will be put into a harem, and I will never see you. And it turned out that the Maharaja's son was already engaged when he was 5 years old to a princess from India. It was supposed to be a royal wedding, so the engagement fell apart. And I am glad, because I didn't want to become a son of Maharaja in India.
Do you know when and where this picture was taken?
No, she must have been very young, so I suppose it was taken already when she was married to my father.
Thank you. And who are these people?
It's my mother, Charlotte Abrani Schatz, and me, Frank Schatz, when I was maybe 11, 12 years old. We were very close. It was really a happy and lovely relationship what I have with my mother. The only thing what I regret that she speak fluently French, English, played the piano, and she never taught me to do those things because she wanted me to have a happy childhood and not to burden me. So it was the only guilty feeling what I have.
Do you know where this was taken, or approximately what year?
It must have been in the 34, 35, and it was taken in Parkan.
In what country, sir?
In Czechoslovakia, that my hometown.
Thank you. And this person, who is this?
My sister Elizabeth Schatz Engel. She was married to Béla Engel, who saved me in Budapest. She was taken to Auschwitz with her 3 months old child and gassed at arrival. It was Dr. Mengele who selected her. She was a lovely girl, very smart, and had a short life.
Do you know when and where this picture was taken?
Must have been much earlier, because it is how I remember her. So it must have been in the 30s, somewhere in the 1930s.
And where do you think it was taken?
In Parkan, in our hometown, because she, when she got married, they settled in our hometown.
And what country, sir?
Czechoslovakia. At that
Thank
time, it was Czech.
Okay, thank you. Who is this person?
It is my brother, older brother, Wojtek Schatz. And he was an athlete, a very strong guy. He was taken to a Hungarian slave labor camp on the Russian front in 1944. And he was liberated at the Buchenwald concentration camp, but he came back as a skeleton, 40 pounds weighted. He came home but recovered, and in the 1950s, early 50s, he emigrated to Israel, and he died in Israel.
Do you know when and where this picture was taken?
Again, it must have been in the 30s. because it is how I remember him.
And where?
In our hometown in Parkan, the Czechoslovakia.
Thank you. Can you tell us about these books, please?
One of the book, Report from a Distant Place, is my book is a collection of selected columns what I wrote during many years for the Virginia Gazette. It seems to be popular because it was printed maybe 10 years ago and is still selling. Interestingly, it sells a lot in the Episcopalian Church in Williamsburg as a bookstore, as a gift store really. And my book is displayed there, and tourists are buying it quite a lot. So it won't make me rich, but makes me feel good. The other book is Heroes of the Holocaust. It was written by Alan Zulo, a very prolific writer, and published by Scholastic, and is distributed or was distributed to all schools in United States. And one chapter is about my experiences during the war. It's also a popular book and was quoted from it in a lot of places. So again, I am proud to be part of it.
And can you tell us when you published this book or when you wrote the book?
I think so. It was 2012 was my book published, and the Holocaust book was earlier even. I don't remember exactly the date, but years ago.
Okay, thank you. What are we looking at here?
It is an article written by Tamara Dietrich, a famous journalist, very good journalist, and she interviewed me here in Williamsburg about how I survived the Holocaust and the Second World War. And she said it was my wit and smartness what saved me. And she is quoting me extensively. And again, this article was reprinted in many places. And it's a very accurate description of what I went through and what I did. Again, it's something what makes me feel good.
And I believe the date is on here.
It's 2005 when it was published.
Okay, thank you. What are we looking at now?
The top photo of me, Frank Schatz, was taken about 10 years ago here in Williamsburg by my wife of 74 years. We were married 74 years. Here in Williamsburg, she took this photo. And one under it is taken on the top of Whiteface Mountain in the Adirondack Mountains. We had a second home in Lake Placid, New York, and we were great hikers and walked everywhere where we could. And just to say that we had a wonderful 74-year marriage, couldn't have been happier or better. She wasn't Jewish, she was a Catholic girl, but not religious, but had the faith. But we never ever had a dispute about religion or any conflict. She died at age 92, at 2 years ago, and I miss her every day. She is buried here in Williamsburg, and I visit her grave almost every day.
Can you give us full names, please, and
It's-
when this was taken? I see that it's there's some wording under it, but can you please say the names?
Her name is Yaroslava Schatz Kremenakova. It's very hard to spell it, but just Yaroslava Schatz. Then I called her always Yarunka, so it's easier. And this one was taken quite a few years ago, maybe 5-6 years ago.
What year would that be?
On Whiteface Mountain. It
No,
is,
what year would that be? What, 2018, 2019?
yes, about that time. I am not sure, but yeah, 5-6 years.
Okay, thank you. And what are we looking at now?
It's Henry Kissinger, the former Secretary of State, who served for 7 years as Chancellor of William and Mary, and me, Frank Schatz, at the Reef Center for International Studies at the College of William and Mary. And under it is Lady Margaret Thatcher, the former Prime Minister of Great Britain, and also Chancellor of William and Mary. Kissinger followed her in this position, and me, Frank Schatz, again at William and Mary. My position at William and Mary as a member of the President's Council and member of the Advisory Council of the Reef Center for International Studies opened up a lot of doors to people who has connection with William and Mary. I wrote about them, interviewed them, so a lot of memories goes with my connection with William and Mary.
You're referring to the College of William and Mary.
Yes, College of William and Mary. It's more 300, almost 30 years old, the second oldest college in the United States after Harvard.
And do you know what year these pictures were taken?
I think so, in maybe 10 years ago. Then I don't know exactly the name, but then both when they served as Chancellor of William and Mary.
Thank you. Thank you very much for speaking with us today, and this now concludes the interview.
Thank you.